say one of the biggest crop circles we ever had it happened in 2001, a place called Milk Hill. And it was like a 6-armed spiral, and it was over 900 feet in diameter and was made of 409 circles. And that appeared overnight. And the weather was terrible the night it happened. It was raining, the visibility wasn't good. But there was this crop circle there first thing the next morning, just in perfect, pristine condition. So, when you get, you can kind of understand the argument when it comes to some of the smaller ones. But when you think about some of the really big ones, it kind of really does start to kind of stretch the credibility of an argument like that, I think. It was made of 409 circles. It was made of 409 circles. And actually, when you go in a really new one that there's been no real visitors to, one of the things you notice straight away is when you walk in that you can hear the crop crunching under your feet, because very often it's not actually laid right flat on the ground. The crop comes up a little bit and then it kind of bends over. So when you're walking around in it, you feel terrible, because you're creating damage. And again, something people don't always know is that if the crops are still growing when the crop circle happens, so if they're still green and growing and nobody walks in there, they will actually recover through phototropism. They will actually kind of stand up again, and it'll be as though it was never there. And it'll be as though it was never there. And it'll be as though it was never there. And it'll be as though it was never there.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Welcome back. We're going Banksy. We're going back to the UK. We're gonna talk about some graffiti artists from the skies. What are they up to, Luke? What do you know about crop circles?
Well, not much. It's a good thing we have Karen coming on the show, because these are just such crazy phenomena in general. Like, you have these incredibly intricate designs, and they're temporary, right? And one of the things we talk about is ancient history and these incredible buildings. I talked with Derek Olson a lot about these incredible megaliths. We went to Peru and saw this incredible construction, right? That just sort of defy logic in the sense of we don't really know how they did it, right? We don't really know how they were able to build, construct, and shape and fit some of these things together, because that knowledge is gone. And crop circles are interesting because they appear year after year across the world, but they are so different and odd and strange, and and there's a lot of people that connect to the UFO phenomena, and at the same time, a lot of people write this off as a hoax, and yet, when you see photos of these things, if you take a little bit of time to look, these are almost impossible things to hoax based upon people that have been on the ground and seen it. They don't break the crop isn't broken.
Yeah,
there are in some cases 400 and 500 circles that exist, and they appear overnight. That's just
one design.
It's just not possible with the amount of time. So you have these sort of an enigma qualities around this, and yet it's still very much high strangeness, because what's the purpose and what's happening here. And so I'm very excited to dive in for the first time on our show here, 190 plus episodes in, to something that's really been going on really for the last, really documented, I feel like, and studied more so in the last 50 years.
Yeah, I hope you guys appreciate this one, because I think I've been messaging her for like a year and a half trying to get...
It's a long game, Nate, the long game.
But she obviously, like a lot of these researchers, they are busy in sort of their season, documenting and doing their thing. So kind of coming out of that season, and she was able to come on. So long time to make this one happen. Most of us just know the movie Signs, and that's the extent of our understanding of crop circles. But it's really bizarre. Some of these are basket weaved together, and like she said at the end, there's a little payoff, some nuggets of truth of what happens. Sort of defy the hoax theory. These things can't be hoaxed. If you want to become a member of the show, blurrycreatures.com/members, get access to, we have to do our little spiel here, to all the bonus stuff. Keep the lights on here at Blurry Creatures. So many people support what we do and help us spend time interviewing, finding these people. Like I said, in emailing them for a year and a half to come on the show. We don't give up, Luke.
We do not.
We just keep going until we get the weirdness. So that's the kind of dudes we're here. We love to find these the truth, and we keep going, and we're probably just two stubborn dummies that just keep plowing ahead,
Yeah.
But
can't stop. Won't stop.
What are crop circles? We're going to find out.
You're now entering not the bone zone, but the crop circle zone.
Well, welcome to the show, Karen Alexander from Temporary Temples. You've been studying crop circles for over 27 years. I'm sure you've gotten to a lot of the blurry topics that we talk about on our show. It's hard to stay in one lane when you're researching these topics. And Luke and I just got back from Peru, so our podcast is starting to take us around different places. And we started talking about Bigfoot, of all things, and lo and behold, that led us down a lot of these rabbit holes. But thank you for coming on Blurry Creatures, and I know you've been in this space a long time, almost 30 years researching, documenting, exploring the phenomena of crop circles. So we're excited to get into that. But we have a break the ice question that we do all the time on our show. Karen, do you have any thoughts on Bigfoot? Do you know anything about this creature, or do you have any thoughts about it? But welcome to Blurry Creatures.
Thank you. Yeah, I have read a little bit about it, and I'm fascinated by it, utterly fascinated by it. I love anything that's kind of weird, wonderful, out of the box, everything that's on the fringe. So yeah, I try and keep up with as much of it as I can. Don't keep up with Bigfoot as much as I do other things, but yeah, I'm fascinated by it. And other, cryptids and strange creatures and so on that people see. So I'm open to it all, is how I kind of feel about it. I've heard people give really good accounts of seeing, strange creatures, and yeah, I just think it's all fascinating. And perhaps all connected as well.
There is a hot debate if there's a British Bigfoot, if he's over there. Some people say so. But
yeah, I don't really know kind of much about the British angle on it, but we have things like the Loch Ness Monster over here, and there's lots of talk about that. But, certainly people have seen some, strange things in the UK. Sort of, we have a lot of wild land here.
Yeah.
I mean, not as much as you guys, but, we do have a lot of wild land here. And, so we get sort of reports of all kinds of strange things that people see, especially if they're, really out in the wilds.
Yeah, you wonder if Bigfoot's flying and he's just traveling the world, because people see him all over the world, and maybe Bigfoot's just hopping in these UFOs and just cruising, or just doing something.
Yeah, or maybe there's a British Bigfoot. Maybe he's a little more proper, a little more refined, and he has tea, and maybe he passed permission before he abducts you,
maybe he's a little shy. Yeah.
I love it.
That's right.
There are some sightings. If I guess this is a worldwide phenomenon when it comes to Bigfoot, but the man monkey, the British Bigfoot. So maybe in all of your documenting of crop circles, you'll run into the big guy across the pond. So
yeah, one day. Let's hope so. Yeah.
Well, Karen, tell us how you got into the studying of these crop circles, and then, like I said, we're pretty green on our show. We don't know a lot about this subject, so we're fascinated to learn and give our listeners a little kind of, peek into this phenomenon?
Okay, so, well, from being a young kid, I just loved the unexplained, the strange. So yeah, I'd sort of come across lots of things. I think the first book I ever really read about anything particularly strange was Whitley Strieber's book Communion. And I think that was back in maybe 1987, something like that. And I would be 17 then, and it scared the bejesus out of me. And I remember putting the book under my bed so I didn't have to look at the cover. But at the same time, I was just fascinated by it. And of course, it was a brilliantly written book. And then that kind of got me sort of thinking about the whole, the idea of, UFOs, extraterrestrials, and all those questions. And then I think after that, the next book I read was Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, who's a British researcher. But the crop circles I got into in 1990, and it was because I'd seen a picture of one in the British newspapers. And it was kind of all over the newspapers then in the early days. And I was just gobsmacked by them. I think the picture I saw was the one that ended up on the front cover of the Led Zeppelin album. And it was it had happened in a really tiny little village called Alton Barnes in Wiltshire, where they have the biggest crop field in the UK. And it was in that field. And it was kind of one of those early crop circles where it was kind of circles with connecting lines and more circles. And then there were sort of these key shapes that came off the circle. So it was a big, long formation. And it, just being blown away by it. And actually, it was a kind of real seminal experience, because it's one that I go back to quite a lot and think about the kind of the impact that it had on my psyche. And I think all kinds of things happen. I mean, first of all, there was a picture of something that shouldn't be there. So that's the kind of first thing that you kind of think about it, is that there's something there that shouldn't be there. And yet there was a beauty and an elegance and a grace to it. And it was very geometric. So there was kind of an order to it as well, which was kind of, again, in kind of out of step with the countryside, which is kind of like very easy and rambling and, and all of that. And yet here was something that was, incredibly precise. And so I was just blown away by it. And my other half, Steve, he actually went down there to have a look at it, and he drove the car down. And again, it was in this tiny little village, and cars were parked all down this country road where you couldn't really pass. And people were stood on the roofs of their cars to look down into the field. And I think the farmer was completely overwhelmed by, what was going on. But yeah, and then after that, it's like catching a bug. It's like you've got to know everything there is to know about it. And we were really lucky in the UK at the time. Even by that stage, there was the beginnings of sort of like UK-wide crop circle group, which I quickly joined, and then got to meet other people who were also interested in it. So yeah, it was just a really instantaneous thing. I thought it was thrilling, and and there's something really, really seductive about a mystery. When you don't have the answer to something, it's incredibly seductive. So, and then it snowballs, doesn't it? Because you meet incredible people as well. So that was the other thing about the subject, was that I got to meet people, from all kinds of different backgrounds that I would never have, got to meet. And, and it kind of widens your horizons and so on. So yeah, it was just a really instant thing. As soon as I saw them, I was just absolutely sort of taken with them.
I spent a lot of time driving through the English countryside, and a long time ago I was in a band playing music, and we did about 4 tours there and got to see a lot of those places. And I know one thing is that it is, like you said, it's pretty private. People keep to themselves, and it's different than the country here in America. I think it's more peaceful, and it's older, and you can just tell these generations of people have been doing this. And I don't think these people want attention, and they're hoaxing these things to bring a bunch of people to their farms,
No, definitely not. I mean, over the years, obviously, I've talked to a lot of farmers. I mean, one of the first things that you realize is that this has been going on a lot longer than you realize. I mean, for me, my first circle I saw was in 1990. For my other half, Steve, he saw his first crop circle in 1980. So it was, 10 years before. But then when you start talking to farmers and they tell you stories about how they and then their parents even would play in these things as kids, then you begin to realize that actually this has been going on a lot longer than you think.
Yeah, Karen, I wanted to ask you about that real quick because, all you need to do is Google crop circles and there'll be a bunch of answers saying this whole thing's debunked. It's a hoax, right? That a guy gets out there with a rope and a piece of wood and they can make concentric circles. And I remember even watching some videos on this. I mean, it's been a few years, but I know that there's a lot of things that pop up and there's no people there hoaxing it. Like there's a very famous video, I believe, from the late 80s or early 90s that kind of shows it just sort of appearing.
You mean the Oliver's Castle?
I was trying to remember. I was trying to Google what that was, but So I wanted to ask you then, like, what do you say to folks that are ultimately really skeptical on the front end, saying, "Oh, we've seen how they do this. They've shown us. There's guys with a rope and they tie it to a thing so they can make circles, and it's just a big, it's a hoax or it's a practical joke or however they try to sort of explain that. That's really a common explanation, right?"
Yeah, it is. And of course, some of that goes on without doubt. I think the longevity thing is interesting, how long this has been going on. And also, sometimes just how many there have been. And also that it's a worldwide thing. It doesn't just happen here. It's been reported now in over 60 different countries. I mean, the UK gets more than its fair share, but I mean, they've happened in the US. They've been photographed, documented. There's been scientific research on some of the circles that appeared in the US. And so there's that too. Yeah. And then there's just, how long do you keep doing this? If that, that's what's going on, that there's never really any credit for it.
Yeah.
It's not like you get a whole shed load of publicity for doing it. And, and that nobody's caught. I mean, this is the biggest, predictable crime wave,
right?
In the UK in the summer, and people are never caught doing it. So, there's that too. And then also, there are some pretty good reports of circles that appeared during daylight hours as well. So one of the famous cases for that was a crop circle that was near Stonehenge in, I think it was 1996. It was a really big circle. It was like in the shape of a sort of a loose spiral, and 151 circles it was made from.
Wow.
And it was like a Julia set fractal. The biggest circles were probably about 70 feet in diameter and then going smaller and smaller to maybe just a couple of feet. And the story goes that some tourists had taken a flight in a light aircraft over Stonehenge. They were over to see the stones, and they flew out around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the summer. It's a lovely day. They flew over Stonehenge. The field is almost bang next door to it. They didn't see anything when they were going out. And then 45 minutes when they were coming back, they spotted this huge crop circle in the field. And so you start to wonder, well, how is that possible? And of course, the pilots fly there all the time. It probably wasn't the first time that pilot had been up that day flying and hadn't noticed anything either. So that it was just really intriguing. How does that happen? And so there were other ones as well, but that's the most famous one.
Yeah, that would take a long time. I mean,
yeah,
just to make something like that, a couple of people probably take them multiple days at least, and then to get the accuracy perfect would be
that's the other thing too. Yeah, say one of the biggest crop circles we ever had it happened in 2001, a place called Milk Hill. And it was like a 6-armed spiral, and it was over 900 feet in diameter.
Wow.
And was made of 409 circles. And that appeared overnight. And the weather was terrible the night it happened. It was raining. The visibility wasn't good. But there was this crop circle there first thing the next morning, just in perfect, pristine condition. So, when you get, you can kind of understand the argument when it comes to some of the smaller ones. But when you think about some of the really big ones, it kind of really does start to kind of stretch the credibility of an argument like that, I think.
Yeah, there's just some local artists and there's some Picassos out there really
So much talent. So much talent. Yeah.
Well, not just even artists, but I mean, and I'm sure we'll come on to this in a little while, but the geometry in some of the crop circles is just, out of this world. And, whoever does it, it really is amazing what they do geometrically, in the fields.
Yeah. Anyone who's a graphic designer and spends time trying to design logos, and it takes a lot of circles and a lot of time just to put, 3 shapes together in a way that's pleasing to the eye and mathematically precise. So 400 circles is insane, especially when you can't see what you're doing. It's in the middle of the night. It's impossible. And, we did an episode on that famous UFO battle. I think it was in Nuremberg back in the 1500s. Yeah. And, we brought on a lot of guys who, one specifically, like an exorcist, was saying that all this UFO stuff is a modern phenomenon. We had to kind of tell him, like, hey, actually, they've been documenting UFO sightings for a long time. What about crop circles? Do we have, we've talked to our friend Travis from Giants of Ancient America, and they've been digging up giant skeletons for hundreds of years, and there was reports of them for a long time. Is crop circles the same?
Yeah, there's a really famous woodcut that dates back to the 1600s, and it's called the mowing devil, and it shows a devil mowing a circle in a field, and there's a story that goes with it that the farmer wanted, to hire somebody to bring his field in at the end of the summer. And, and he was talking to some locals, and they said that they wanted to be paid so much money for doing it. And he was outraged and said, oh, better the devil do it, and then the story goes that he found this huge mown circle in his field. So that's I mean, there are kind of stories like that. That's the most famous one. But of course, crop circles also are similar in some ways to lots of our ancient sites in the UK. So, we have lots of stone circles here, the Stonehenge being the most famous, but the biggest is actually Avebury. And there have been so many circles around there. We also have, what we call round barrows on the landscape, which are sort of like these little earthen mounds. There's Silbury Hill, which is in a very similar area as well. So there's kind of this connection seemingly between them. And even when they don't happen in the UK, when they happen abroad, there've been circles near Serpent Mount, I think, in the US. Whoa. And so, there's kind of this kind of love affair between ancient and these modern, which is where the phrase temporary temples comes from. It's kind of like that modern comparison, that here is sort of a modern day sacred site that sits alongside our ancient sacred sites over here. And that, that's been happening this year too. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, like your thoughts about why, this is obviously be your doing 30 years of research, what your opinion is, but the idea that these things show up near sacred sites and ancient megalithic sites that are also very geometric, right? That's one of the things as Nate and I have really got into things like Peru and Egypt and Sardinia, Cyclopean architecture and all these different things that the geometry is insane. It is beyond what we believe that, what I think people assume or believe the capacity was as that type of technology, right? And so you have this really weird enigma. And then in the same way, you have these insane sort of geometric designs and very intricate circles that are appearing in very similar places. I was just curious on what your thoughts are on why.
To me, they're all connected, in a sense that they are connected by, how would I describe it? A same canon of number and geometry. So, many crop circles share some of the geometric properties of Stonehenge, for instance. And then, one of the things that I did in the 90s was to read the work of Schwaller de Lubitz, which you may have heard of. He wrote this incredible book called The Temple of Man, which is about the temples in Egypt, and particularly, I think it's Karnak is one of them. There's another one as well. But he spent years out there measuring and surveying Egyptian temples and came back with this. He wrote this magnificent book, which kind of showed that there was kind of like this canon of number and proportion and ratio that underpinned all of those buildings. And it was part of Egyptian philosophy. And we find it, in other ancient sites, not just in Egypt. So I'm sure you guys must have read Graham Hancock and maybe Randall Carlson, so that's the kind of, I mean, I was lucky enough to know John Michel, who wrote the really great book, The New View Over Atlantis, in probably, I think in the 1960s he wrote it, but it was about this very stuff, that he was kind of looking at particularly British ancient sites and finding that they were all connected in some way. And crop circles kind of dovetail right into that because they use exactly this, so we find things like squaring the circle a lot in the crop circles. We also find pi and Fibonacci, so phi as well, and just done in the most crazy, fantastic ways, that you would never kind of expect unless you were looking for them. I mean, just like when you look at Stonehenge, there's a hidden geometry that you can kind of superimpose over the top of it. It's exactly the same with crop circles. Interestingly, with crop circles, there's it has a double side. So there's kind of like the exoteric geometry. So that's the stuff that you see immediately when you look at it. So it might be divided into 3, or it might have a pentagram in it. So that would be 5, hexagons are 6. But then very often there's an esoteric or a hidden geometry. So when you actually draw them on paper and you begin looking at the proportions between the different parts of the circles, you realize that there's all this kind of hidden proportions going on as well. But it's exactly the same kind of language, which I just find utterly fascinating, that there's this kind of continuity somehow. I mean, some people kind of talk about the idea of, a universal quantum holographic kind of design base for the entirety of creation, which is a really nice idea, and that's something that nature subscribes to. But the fact that our ancient ancestors were somehow aware of this, is interesting as well. And that it was clearly important to them, that they would build these huge temples or these stone circles, clearly things that were meant to last, or to pass on down knowledge through the ages. I mean, crop circles as well have been linked to astronomical phenomena as well. We've had crop circles that, I remember one year we had a transit of Venus, where Venus goes across the front of the sun and you can see the little shadow. That we had a crop circle depicting that. There was one a couple of years ago, we had a partial eclipse in the UK. There was a crop circle that depicted that. So crop circles are very varied in their imagery, whether it's, very classical geometry or so the astrological link, or sometimes some of them are just images. Some of them don't even really seem to have a basic geometry, but you can tell that that's not the emphasis of what's being presented. They're much more kind of like, like art or graphic design, in the sense that they portray some kind of image. I mean, I'm sure you've seen pictures of the alien face crop circle, perhaps from 2002, which was fascinating as well. So, I think within, the whole gamut of crop circles over the years, we're presented with different things at different times. So they're not the same, but they kind of have this connective thread through them that kind of loosely connects them somehow.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen that crop circle, and I think a lot of people just think it's hoaxed or fake or photoshopped, which is why I wanted to do an episode on this, because
I mean, I went in the alien face, actually went in it on the ground.
Really?
And
there we go.
Yeah, and
Karen was there. Yeah, so you were there.
I was there, yeah. And it was just unfathomable at ground level. You just could not make out what it was at all. I mean, that's true for a lot of crop circles. I mean, the average size of a crop circle in the UK is about 200 feet in diameter. So they're not small. And, they're not on flat ground either. People tend to think, because when you see the aerial photographs, everything on the ground looks flat when you're coming down, but they're not at all. So that's a difficulty too, but the alien face was fantastic on the ground. It was just, you had no idea what you were standing in at all. It was, just
wow.
Yeah.
Karen, I wanted to ask you something, because it reminds me in some ways of like the Nazca Lines you get in, where these things are really only, viewable in sort of at scale from the air, which is really strange to me, because, we've only really been flying since the Wright brothers, right? Or so we're at maybe just a little over 100 years. And really, I mean, for all practical purposes, really maybe only since like the 30s in a way that's significant,
Yeah.
right? And yet
Yeah.
these things are really only, like you say, you couldn't tell it was an alien face. They're really only viewable from the air. And then you think about there's other things. There's other ancient things that are not in crops, right? Because crops, of course, are cyclical, right? So you probably have a crop.
That's right.
You have a crop circle season, just like you
Yeah.
have a football season or a baseball season or whatever it is. You have a season for these things because the crops have to be tall enough. But
Yep.
there are things across the planet that are ancient, that are only viewable from the air, which is bizarre. And then these, and I was going to say your opinion on maybe why that is, because if you can't, if you're not able to see it from the ground, and we are, we are ground creatures, we don't do a whole
Mostly
lot of,
we are, yeah.
Mostly, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that's clearly the case, that they are best viewed from the air. I mean, obviously some of them you can view from a hilltop or a hillside or something like that, that you can get a look at them. But mostly, they are just meant to be seen from the air. But I do think that kind of, we get into kind of the levels of symbolism within crop circles, in the sense there's a lot of dualism goes on in circles. The most basic ones is that the designs are made from standing and flattened crop,
right?
So there's that one. Then there's the ancient and modern thing, so you get your ancient sites and then these modern sites. And then there's also this kind of, as being in the air and being on the ground, there's this kind of, so I mean, I think, and I also think, they don't just serve one purpose. They're really kind of multivalent in that sense that, I mean, lots of people consider them to be kind of acupuncture points, or maybe something to heal the earth. Indigenous people that have looked at crop circles are kind of said that that's kind of how they kind of see them, as somehow they are either messages from the earth, or that somehow they're involved in healing the earth in some way. And of course, then dowsers have looked at crop circles as well, and many of them kind of pick up on earth energies, which again, that connection to ancient sites as well, where they're, people pick up, who are sensitive can pick up, earth energies too. So, there's this kind of, this kind of dualism that goes on with them, where, they're kind of out of place, but they're also dovetailed right in to, the human culture and system. So it is interesting. I mean, we're Steve and I are very fortunate. We fly over the circles most summers. We get to see them from the air, and it's it's a killer experience. It's I can't recommend it enough. It's to see them from the air is to truly see them. I mean, the other, just to mention that, the other thing is that, that we were talking about the geometry earlier. I mean, one of the things that gets talked about a lot is the idea of vibration and the science of cymatics, Hans Jenny's cymatics, and how it was Schwaller de Lubit's idea that the geometry used in the ancient Egyptian temples was used to create some sort of subtle energy or vibration that actually raised up the vibration of the human beings inside, that it had a spiritual function. And I think, you can again make an equivalence with crop circles on that level too. Lots of people have incredible experiences inside of them. And I do think they are meant to be walked inside, that very often the way that they're placed in a field, they'll be kind of be like an invitation to walk inside. I mean, even the way that the geometry is done. So when you look at a crop circle, for instance, what you'll notice is that there are very few places inside it where you don't have access if you were to walk inside it. So you'll find that the geometry is actually slightly pulled out, that there'll be spaces between where you can walk around. A friend of mine used to call them hospitality portals. But if you were to draw the geometry on paper, the classic geometry, there'd be no separation because the lines would crisscross. They'd create the pattern, but there wouldn't be the gaps. So when when you're drawing crop circle geometry, you have to create the gaps, which actually are really difficult to do even on paper. So I think that there's an element of that. I think they are kind of spaces to which we have an invitation. There's that kind of invitational thing about them. And so, and again, for, thinking about them from the air, that there are lots of different kind of ways to interact with them and to explore them. And I think maybe there's something quite deliberate about that. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, you think about it like an ancient UFO sighting, you know what you're looking at. You're looking at something that's flying around. You don't know what it is. But I wonder if some of these ancient crop circles, if they were going on back in the, you wouldn't know as a farmer that what you're standing in and what it is, because you can't see it. You can't see it from above.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes the only time a crop circle is found is when the farmer actually comes across one in the field when he's about to combine it. I mean, we've got the call and had to rush out to get to see one, before it's combined. So yeah. I mean, and also just to say, it happens in all kinds of different crops too. So it's not just wheat and barley, which are the crops that are grown most prevalent in the UK, but we have them in rapeseed, which I think is called canola in the US. Mm-hmm. They happen in maize, which is corn. We also have had them in things like linseed and beans and borage, which is kind of like a herbal plant that's grown in, which has these gorgeous kind of blue flowers on it. So they kind of, sometimes you get them in just grass. And we've had some in ice and snow as well. I mean, it's
really,
so so it kind of happens in all kinds of different mediums, but mostly in crops, because I guess it's kind of a huge canvas, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of,
well, yeah. I mean, you wonder if it's like just some teenage aliens just tagging the street signs. Well, one thing we learn a lot is that the ancients built these things to last, right? We were in Peru, and why do you think, you have these things that they were built to last the test of time, and these things just go away really quick? Why do you think they're dropping these designs?
Well, again, I just think it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, again, I like to draw a comparison to sort of when Buddhists will make their sand mandalas, and they make these incredible, intricate spiritual drawings that, again, they have a geometric component to them, and then the whole point of doing them is that you wipe them away afterwards,
right?
And that somehow the prayer is released when the mandala is made, and I think maybe there's a similar thing going on here, that it's that these crop circles create some kind of vibratory field, and that they're not meant to be for all time. They're just meant to be there for a while. And also that the way that fits in again to the cyclical nature of nature itself. So in the UK, our crop circle season probably starts at the earliest in April, and that will be in canola, because that's usually the first crop to reach sufficient height to actually hold a crop circle. And then it'll be followed by barley and then wheat and maybe maize at the end of the season. And it would normally finish in the UK maybe about mid-August, something like that, when the fields come in. So, yeah, I mean, again, it's just one of those interesting sort of questions, but I like the idea, that somehow that they're not, that these are a kind of geometry and a kind of space that are not for all time. They are kind of just temporarily there for just a while.
Temporary temples, if you will.
Yeah, temporary temples. Yeah.
You got some Banksies in the sky over there, just dropping them down. And we like to ask a lot of why questions on the podcast. You've been doing this a long time. What are a few stories that sort of stumped made you rethink things? Like, we'll talk to people about Bigfoot encounters, and it sounds, kind of whatever. It's Bigfoot's doing this thing. And then you hear these stories where you're like, what? We interviewed a guy that said that he was in a cabin and something was projecting images into his mind. He could see through the eyes of Bigfoot out in the woods watching him earlier that day. And you're just like, these are the stories that really go, well, what is this creature? Because it's not just the ape that's walking around. He's doing things that, if these stories are true, and I believe that they are, most of them, what are some stories that really have just made you rethink things?
Well, I think like a lot of, a lot of paranormal spheres, if you want to call it that, it has its woo, and so it's, for me, that's the most fascinating part of it, my own particular kind of research that I've done. I mean, I've done lots of things over the years. I took part in sampling, taking plant samples and, drying them all out and then shipping them over to the US. And I've done all that kind of thing. But really, my personal interests are in the geometry of it, which you've probably got a good idea of now, but also in the kind of the interactive side of it, the side that is, the woo side, so right from the get-go, I was really intrigued by this because lots of people in the early days started talking about synchronicities that would happen in conjunction with the crop circle. So there were very often you would hear stories of people saying, oh, I was driving past a field one day and I thought, oh, wouldn't that be a great place for a crop circle, only for there to be one the next time that they drove by. So you hear that kind of story a lot. And even to this day, people will kind of tell you those sorts of stories. Then you will hear stories about, how people discovered this whole subject by a whole series of synchronicities. So they were kind of drawn into it that way. Then you would have, particularly in the early days, you would have researchers who, wanting to somehow categorize what was going on, would kind of make little rules for the crop circle phenomenon. So it was like, all crop circles do this, or all crop circles do that, or no crop circles do this. And then, of course, along would come a crop circle that would break the rule,
right,
almost straight away. So there was that kind of thing going on as well. But the synchronicity side of it was really interesting. So in the early 90s, there were some researchers that got together to actually try and look at that. Was there any way, we needed to be recording these things, we needed to be, keeping those stories for posterity, because one day they might become relevant in some way that we don't understand now. But we also wanted to know, was it possible for humans to influence what was going on? So when you listen to people, talk about how they felt that they had somehow been touched by the phenomenon or the connection to it, was it possible to kind of do that in reverse, And there were several projects done in the early 90s to do with that. And it takes kind of really, it took a very similar line to things like CE5 that goes on even now. When I think it was back in 1993, I did the CSETI training back then. And because crop circles were happening, there were also lots of UAP sightings that happened around the crop circles themselves. So I was really interested in that. I was interested in this idea of not being just a kind of a passive responder to what was going on, but kind of being an active participant in it. So I found that was really interesting. So we were able to look at that. And then we looked at things like where crop circles would happen year on year. So were there particular fields where crop circles would appear each year? There were one or two, not many, but there was a place near where I used to live where that did happen. So we kind of combined a whole load of things and kind of thought, right, let's get out there, let's get some cameras up, let's see if we can catch what's going on, let's see if we can somehow influence what's going on. So we used kind of visualization techniques. We used sounds as well, because there have been strange sounds recorded in crop circles as well. I think one of them is still used in the CSETI thing now. But, so we combined a lot of things. And I had a small group with some friends. There were 7 of us, and we got together one evening, and part of the work we were going to do is to do this short visualization where we walked along a tractor line into a field and kind of what would we find? That was kind of the visualization thing. So we've concluded doing that. Everybody drew what they thought they had seen or intuited or whatever. And much to our disappointment, they were all different, because we thought, wouldn't it be great if everybody drew the same thing, but that didn't happen. And then we did a crop watch at this particular field where there had been circles most years. And when we turned up to do that, actually the crop had failed in the field that year. So that it wasn't even planted. But we decided to stay, we did a night watch. And actually that night, the whole group of us had a UFO sighting. And
really?
Wow.
We saw these 2 lights in the sky. They were really high up in the sky. And it was a full moon, and there was a larger light at the front, a smaller one at the back. And we watched this thing kind of go across the sky and go into the kind of the aura of the moon, the light aura that you get around the moon, and then didn't come out again.
Oh, that's weird.
And one of our group was an amateur astronomer, who was completely stumped. But so we thought, this is what a great experience, So that was fantastic. And then about a week later, one of the guys from the group gave me a call, and he was a bit of a joker. And we always like to have a giggle. And he said, "Oh, there's been this massive crop circle reported." He said, "And it's by the M1 motorway. Let's go and see it." And I thought he was pulling my leg, because where I lived at the time, I didn't live in the south of England, which I do now. I lived in the Midlands. We did have crop circles there, but not really big ones. They tended to be quite simple, small ones. So I thought, I'm just going to go along with this, pull it, just sort of call his bluff, really. Anyway,
right.
He swung by. We went off for a drive, and there was this huge crop circle right by the motorway, and it was in the shape of kind of like a crucifix. So it was kind of a long line and then a shorter one at 90 degrees. But then there were kind of circles and ringed circles on the ends, and there was this key shape, and it was amazing. It was a place called Charlie Knoll in Leicestershire. And so we went and saw the farmer and said, "We've seen your crop circle. Can we come and have a look at it?" And she was really great, the farmer's wife. And she said, "Well, it's actually been here a week."
No way.
And we thought, okay, this is interesting. When did it happen? And so she said, "Well, it happened on the 7th of July. So we thought, oh, well, that's interesting, because the 7th day of the 7th month, and there'd been 7 of us in our little group. So we're thinking, okay, this is kind of interesting. So we get in, so we call everybody together and we go in there, and what we begin to realize almost straight away was that all the things that we had drawn in our visualization were somehow incorporated into this design.
No way.
And it was a kind of really stop you in your tracks moment, where you think, wow, what's going on here, And it's interesting that, one of the things we did that day was I called another friend who was a surveyor by profession, and he brought out his theodolite and took a survey of the crop circle. But when we got the information back home, because you kind of take all the numbers down, and then you kind of transpose it into an image, we couldn't make head or tail of the numbers. Weird. So that was another strange thing that happened. Wow. The farmer said the dogs wouldn't go in the field. That's always very interesting, that animal interactions with these are often very strange. I was in a circle in 2012, and the farmer's daughter there was used to ride horses, and she actually rode a horse down the tractor line to come in to bring it into the crop circle, which was huge. But the horse was having none of it. It ended up rearing up before it would. She had to turn him around and take him out of the field. So that's always interesting. So yeah, there was kind of lots of strange stuff going on around this. But and then the other thing was that when we looked at where we had done the crop watch, and then where we had done the home where we'd done the meditation, that the crop circle fell in the nearest field to the center of that line. So almost straight away there was this, it made the hairs on the back of your arms stand on end. It was, wow, there's something going on here, and that is beyond just A, people stomping stuff down in a field, and B, even just, messages from aliens. If you want to think of it on that, there's something so much more going on here.
That's wild. That's just wild, though, to think of it. Literally, when you were doing this exercise, that on that day, everybody's designs were incorporated in a larger design. Yeah, that's just. Yeah, I don't know how you make heads and tails of that. In a way that you wouldn't imagine. No, exactly. And we were not the only people doing that type of work. There were other groups as well. And in fact, the day we did that particular crop watch, there was a group down in Sussex, which is right on the south coast of the UK. And there'd also been a group in Wiltshire who were doing night watches. And because there have been circles in Sussex, and there are obviously lots of them in Wiltshire.
And we found out when we started sort of chatting with each other that we had all had the same UFO sighting that night, and described that the large light and the smaller light going into the moon and not coming out. So that, that was, and in fact, one of the people on the watch in Wiltshire was actually my future husband. So that,
there you go.
So again, this gives you this idea that everything is connected, which is kind of one of the oldest spiritual teachings in the world, isn't it? This idea that there's somehow this fantastic tapestry to which we're all connected somehow. And I think, the crop circles were showing us that in a very sort of real way. And, it's interesting over the years, just how much being involved with a subject like this changes you. Steve and I have just put the finishing touches to our latest crop circle yearbook, which we publish every year. And one of the things that I've been writing about in that is this idea about how, crop circles can be considered a communication that, that is kind of an initiation into a new way of thinking. For me, it's connected to, an evolution in human consciousness and becoming aware of these things, that this interconnectedness of things and, how everything kind of works together is kind of central to what we're being shown. I mean, and not just in the crop circle world, but in many other, even in the UAP subject, I bet, and I'm sure it happens in Bigfoot too, that there is this idea somehow that things are connected in a way that we don't yet really understand.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of weird things. Yeah.
I read an incredible book recently. It was a novel by a guy called China Mieville, and the book is called The City and the City. And the story is about the main story of the book. It's a police procedural, it's a murder story, right. But it's kind of it has this sci-fi setting where there are these two cities that kind of coexist side by side, but each is unaware of the other. And they are kept as well. Their societies are designed to keep the knowledge of the other city away from the other. So even though they may go to work every day and sit next to somebody in the other city, they're psychologically trained not to see it. And if you do see it, it's called, in the book, this is called a breach. And it's a horrendous crime, as you can imagine, in these dystopian sci-fi novels. Right. But this kind of idea really struck me, that what a fantastic metaphor maybe for what is happening in our world now, that there is this, that there are these other dimensions or layers to reality, whatever it is that you want to call it, that coexist alongside with us. And every now and again, we get a glimpse of it, and whether it's, Sasquatch, or whether it's a UAP, or whether it's a crop circle, or whatever it is, ball of light, whatever, that somehow there are times when, I don't know, the veil is thin, or you're in a slightly altered state of consciousness, and suddenly you begin to get a glimpse into a bigger and wider reality. Yeah.
We talk a lot about, frequencies, vibrations, and things with ancient construction, and I wonder if everything has a vibration, a certain frequency, right? And we as human beings, we can only see things that vibrate in our, they call it dimensions and realms. What if it's just, it's like playing a musical note when you can tell when it's wrong, but if someone strums our chord, we can see a Bigfoot, or we can see a UFO, or we can see this thing. It could be as easy as that, because when you're talking about crop circles, I think about a lot of the videos people send us over the years where people send different frequencies and they put sand together and they create these crazy, they look like crop circles.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So, and you're talking about sound. There's this weird sound that happens around crop circles. Are they just turning up the speakers and then it just makes this design in the barley?
Well, I mean, that is completely optional, isn't it? I mean, it's a possibility.
The old barley boombox, just crank it up.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the science of cymatics. I mean, I think I saw something today when I was scrolling on the internet, about that. Is it that astronauts take up something that plays the Schumann resonance with them into when they go to the space station? And the Schumann resonance is kind of like the vibratory kind of signature of the earth, and that there's something about having that with them, that that kind of keeps them together on some kind of level, which is fascinating. But yeah, I mean, on a very basic level, geometry is vibration. So, if you're looking for, a definition, shape is a fundamental response to vibration. So like you were talking there about, people who take sand and they put it on a plate, and then they might take like a violin bow and they take it down the side of the plate to play a note. And the sand kind of springs into a geometric shape. And as you change the note or the vibration or frequency up and down, so that the shapes change. I think they're called Chladni plates. And, I think they first discovered this maybe in the 1800s. And then it was taken on to a whole new level by a scientist called Hans Jenny, I think in the 1950s, who began to use electronic equipment to look at this relationship. And there are some fantastic videos, if you look them up, look cymatics up or Hans Jenny up on YouTube or whatever, you'll see that they even filmed some stuff, where they would use something like lycopodium powder, which is a really fine powder. They'd put it on this plate or base, and then they would vibrate it. And it would not just create geometric shapes, though it did do that, but also things that, it would start to excite the powder. They would look like mountain ranges,
interesting,
and maybe sea creatures, and you begin to realize just how fundamental that whole idea is to the way that all of creation is made, including living things. So it's so fundamental to the way that everything is put together.
Yeah, that's the Genesis story. They spoke.
It is. Yeah,
they spoke creation into existence. So it's a sound, which is fascinating because I think that's, you wonder, like when we were in Peru, I was wondering if because scientists have been able to recreate levitation with sound waves now. We've seen little droplets of glue in water, and you wonder if they had some sort of UFO technology to shape the stones, lift them in the air, and put them into place. That it's it seems so fantastical to us, but these are just these. On our show, we've kind of talked about how there was sort of this angelic human mixing, and knowledge was given to us, and it created a lot of weird stuff, and everything kind of got out of hand. Which is a whole nother podcast, but I think that, these crop circles are fascinating because it seems like a language. It seems like they're saying something like, hey, we're here. And I think a lot of times Luke and I are trying to get people to open their minds to the fact that we have evidence. We have Bigfoot tracks that can't be faked. We've got giant skeletons reports and steps in stone. We have actual, remains of these things. And here's these little crop circles, which can't be faked, all of them. Are they just saying, you think it's just, we're here? We're flying around.
Yeah, on its most basic level, yes, is the answer to that. But then we get onto this whole, idea of the idea of a language, through using number and proportion and ratio. Because to do basic geometry, all you need to be able to do is to count. You don't actually have to do maths at all. You don't need complex maths to do geometry. And in fact, a particular hero of mine was a guy called Professor Keith Critchlow, who's written some fantastic books on geometry. Said that the compass was the most brilliant scientific instrument ever created by man, because you can use it both to measure the world and then to recreate those measurements of the world. So and also, going back to, the idea of ancient civilizations, that these numbers all come from nature. So, for instance, if we're talking about 5, for instance, or the Fibonacci numbers, those all come from nature. And in fact, Fibonacci is found in all living things. So, it's kind of like the calling card of life, if you like. Our human bodies are all made up from phi proportions, and we find it obviously in the natural world in plants and flowers and animals and so on. Another friend of mine calls the Fibonacci sequence God's phone number, because it's that's how ubiquitous it is in nature, particularly in living things. So all of these things, all of these discoveries were kind of made from people being really keen observers of nature. And that what they were looking to do was to walk in the steps of the divine as they saw it, to recreate the works of the divine as humans, as an act of reverence or worship, or, you know, the idea of being at one with nature and the cosmos.
I was going to say, do you see crop circles signs, like, so let's talk about Fibonacci, do you see repeating designs over and over again over the years? Are they like leaving, are they particular to a certain design, or are they always different?
They are nearly always different, but there can be variations on a theme. So, you know, I mean, from the geometry point of view, you'll get a single circle, so that's one, you know, so that is all about unity. And then sometimes you'll get two-ness, where you might have two connecting circles or two parts to a design. So that's about diversity. And then you move on to the number 3, which you sometimes see as a triangle or whatever, so that there's a triunity there. So, and then, you know, and again, these numbers are not just quantities, they also have qualities. For instance, going back to the circle, it is number 1. It's about a unity, but it's also about something that's indivisible. So it's, you know, and it's why for many ancient cultures, the circle was seen as a representation of the divine, because it was something that couldn't be divided, and it was something that encompassed everything. So, and then the square would represent the earth. So, you know, you have the 4 corners of the earth, and it represented the 4 classic substances, so the earth, air, fire, and water, which the ancients would have been familiar with. But also, you know, it's about, you know, creating a right angle. It's about building things in the world. So these things kind of have meaning too, but the meaning is kind of taken from the way that they are observed in nature. So this becomes a philosophy. I mean, you're talking Pythagoras here, you know, who taught these things, you know, thousands of years ago, and who probably learned them from the ancient Egyptians, who probably learned them from, you know, I mean, this is a philosophy that goes way back, but it's almost a universal kind of philosophy. So when you're looking at the crop circles, you're kind of looking at variations on these themes, kind of subtle variations on them, which are just fascinating, you know, and then looking at how maybe numbers are married together. So if you know, many crop circles are patterns within a circle, you know, so there's a circular perimeter to them. So that's something about something being contained within something. So, you know, when you begin to sort of look at them on that deep level, you begin to realize that there's a really subtle language here that you can follow. It isn't like a code that you decode, you know, it's not like a lot of symbols and signs which have some kind of equivalent somewhere else, and you have to, you know, do that. It's different to that, but it is, you know, it is a language. I mean, there are many, you know, kind of speculative geometers in the world today that just study the philosophy behind the ways in which numbers come together. So, for instance, one of the numbers we sometimes see in crop circles is the number 7. And 7 is known as the virginal number because it doesn't mix with other numbers geometrically. You know, it's not like, say, like 4 and 8 would marry really well together, or 6 and 12, or even 6 and 8 can marry, or 6 and 4 can marry. But 7 is kind of on its own. It doesn't marry. And when you begin to look at myths and legends to do with the number 7, you know, you begin to realize that this is that thread, that golden thread that kind of connects those ancient times to what's going on now. So it, you know, again, it becomes so interesting when you know, start to look at this. I mean, one of the things that the crop circles do force you to do is to become what a friend of mine called a noticer of things. I remember once he was a really great friend of mine, and he used to speak at our crop circle conferences. He's sadly passed now. I remember once introducing him and saying, you know, I called him a master geometer because he was, you know, he was great. And then I got told off then. But he said, I'm not a master geometer. He said, I'm just a noticer of things. And I just thought that was so wonderful, because that's what this kind of stuff forces you to do. It forces you to look at things when you're presented with something that's seemingly impossible, it kind of, it opens your mind, and, and you begin to look at the world in a different way. And as a consequence of that, human consciousness changes. So, I think all of this stuff, we talk a lot, in recent times about all the stuff that's going on with the UAP thing. And, and that interests me, very much. And I kind of, I'm a bit of a geek. I kind of like the technology part of it. I kind of like all that stuff. But the big question for me is how open knowledge of all of that, not just the UFO thing, but this idea that we live in a world that is so much wider and deeper than we currently understand, the effect that will have on the consciousness of humankind. And it also makes me angry too when I think about, how this may have been kept secret for years. Yeah. And how much that's held back human consciousness. Where would we be now if those kinds of things would have been able to be open, acknowledged much sooner? It kind of makes me angry and a little bit sad. But, here we are, we are where we are. It is what it is. But, I think it's
a lot of fear,
to me that the big thing, again, people talk about, wouldn't it be great if we had, flying saucer technology or whatever, and I'm thinking, wouldn't it be great if we just really understood much more deeply what it was to be human, and that we're not alone, and that there are other intelligences out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how what you're describing is how my mind works sometimes, because you were talking about the number 7, and then you're with 7 people, and then you see this crucifix and like crop circle, and it's like, well, that 7 is a biblical number as well. So you're like, wait, what's going on here? And I one of my last questions for you is, you see these crop circles and you see the way that they're made. Is there like a different technique to how the crops are pushed down or matted in different circles, or is it all the same? You can tell right away this is the same technique, this is the same method, or is there like a different sauce per circle?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and the answer is yes and no. So one of the things that you realize pretty quickly, well, in the early days of the circles, when we just had circles, the crop would be laid down, and it would be in a swirl, so either clockwise or counterclockwise. And some people think that the crop is cut. It isn't. It kind of just lays down. And actually, when you go in a really new one that there's been no real visitors to, one of the things you notice straight away is when you walk in that you can hear the crop crunching under your feet, because very often it's not actually laid right flat on the ground. It kind of, the crop comes up a little bit and then it kind of bends over. So when you're walking around in it, you feel terrible, because you're creating damage. And again, something people don't always know is that if the crops are still growing when the crop circle happens, so if they're still green and growing and nobody walks in there, they will actually recover through phototropism. They will actually kind of stand up again.
Really?
And and it'll be as though it was never there.
That's wild. Wow. That's wild. Yeah.
It is. And obviously as the crops mature, and for the last month that they're in the field, they're essentially dead. They're dry and dead. That's different, because they won't recover, because the plants are essentially dead. They're just drying out in the field. So, and then the other thing that you'll notice in a lot of crop circles is that sometimes the crop is not just laid and swirled. Sometimes it can be woven and knotted. So some of them have like a basket weave lay in them. Really? Some of the centers are swirled, some of them, and each one can be very different. And there's a really good friend of mine, a researcher called Dan Vidler, who has this amazing website, which is called ukcropcircles.co.uk. And he actually has for years now gone in and photographed all these different types of things going on with the crops inside the crop circles. And if you're curious about that, I really recommend that you go and have a look at it, because some of the things that go on inside of them are just as amazing as seeing them from the air. So my answer to your question is that it's kind of, there isn't one standard way, but some of them are beautiful. I've been in them and it just looks like water has run over the tops. The crop flows sort of like water inside. It's just incredible to see, really beautiful.
Yeah, they're not broken, and they're weaved together sometimes like a basket.
Sometimes, yeah.
Wow.
Which is just kind of blows the a hole in that theory that humans just got some boards and
Stomp them down.
Yeah. In that vein, then, like, I mean, 30 years in the field, what's your theory on, or best theory on who or what is creating these, or your most current line of thinking? Because I'm sure it's probably changed.
That's probably the best question. Well, I just think there is some sort of connection with NHI, non-human intelligence, and I mean, for me, my involvement with the crop circles has always been a very positive thing. It's not been a particularly scary experience. I've had some really high strange experiences to do with this, including hearing the crop circle sound in my house one afternoon. But
wow, okay.
I think that, to me, the crop circles speak of, this need to develop ourselves as human beings just as much as we're developing with technology, that we're not keeping up with that. Our fascination seems to be ever more with technology and all of that. And this kind of offers us a different way of thinking about the world and our place in it, and seems to me to be an invitation to kind of to improve ourselves a little bit somehow. So that's kind of my thinking about it.
Mm. Well, appreciate you coming on our show and talking about all these things related to crop circles.
No, it's been my pleasure.
I'd love it if you could maybe send us a couple photos that are your most favorite. We can post it on our channels.
Yeah, no problem.
And kind of give people some context to kind of especially that alien one. I've seen it so many places I probably could find it, but we'll do some posts about this. But can you tell people sort of where to find you and your website and your books and everything you want to pitch?
Thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, our website is www.temporarytemples.co.uk, and there's so much stuff on there. There is an image library of crop circle photographs that go all the way back to 1994 to the current season, 2023, which is just finished here. It's completely free to view. You can go and have a look at all of that. In some of the more recent years, you'll find some of my drawings and geometry analysis on there as well, and also our crop circle yearbooks, which we have published every year since 1999 now, and they're kind of just a collection of the best circles from each year. I write some commentary text about it and about the circles, and then some kind of my latest thinking about them. So those are all in there. But yeah, I mean, just to encourage people to look and to spend some time looking at the images, because they, some of the circles are just so beautiful. They deserve to be seen. And, and if anybody's got any questions or whatever, they can always email us through the website.
It's like my wonderful co-host over there. He's just a beautiful man.
Oh, you flatter me, Nate. Thank you. No,
but thank you.
Yeah, Karen, thank you so much for this. It's so fascinating. I think the idea that there is this universal language in math is even just at the most basic level is a fascinating sort of paradigm to enter into thinking about these temporary designs. I just find that part fascinating as well. So thanks so much for your research and for spending time with us today. And so very interesting to try to unpack some of these mysteries, as you say.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, and it was lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Is the UK the most concentrated crop circles in the world?
I think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it is. Yeah. But I mean, we have them all over Europe as well. They've been reported in Japan, in China, I think, US, all over the place. Brazil, I think there was some in Brazil this year. Yeah. Australia.
Wow. Well, our listeners are going to like this and appreciate it, and there's lot to ponder. Just when you think you get more knowledge of what's going on, it just gets weirder.
Get more questions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Karen, we'll post this, and we'll be promoting it a lot. Probably come out next week, and we're kind of on a UFO string right now, so we'll keep going.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, isn't there, in that kind of world at the moment. So yeah.
Well, have a wonderful night. I know it's nighttime over there in England, so
yeah, it's getting dark here now.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay,
all
guys.
Right.
All right.
Cheerio.